purpose of promoting political responsibility through participation in and being informed about political issues and candidates for office in our local, state, and national government. And by the way, don't forget our candidates night on February 27th at 7 o'clock, right here. Alrighty. Now, tonight, our speaker is Susan Willeke from the Ohio Ethics Commission. She joined the Ethics Commission in 2005, where she oversees and conducts educational and communications outreach. She will give our presentation, and after her presentation, she will honor a question and answer segment from the floor. So without further ado, I will have a pleasure of introducing Mrs. Susan Willeke of the Ohio Ethics Commission.
Good evening. Wait, this is not quite the crowd y'all got for Senate Bill 5 though, I hear, huh? What's up with that? Where'd everybody go? Right? I think I just messed this up too. Well, how is everyone this evening? Great. You know, I'm suspecting that the reason we don't have a big crowd is around the community. Here's how the conversation went, right? The ethics law? Seriously? 60 minutes of hearing about the ethics law? Well, we may as well just have somebody in to talk about the stimulation of watching paint dry, right? Equal level of interest, right? You know, I have found, I'm completely biased, I admit, but I have found in my line of work that people are occasionally surprised at how interested they find themselves in the study of ethics when we really start talking about it. But for example, how many of you would be willing to identify yourself as a people watcher? Is there anybody here that be kind of content to kind of sit on a park bench on a nice day and watch the world walk by? Yeah. You know, for those of us who find people fascinating, you might be surprised at how interested you find yourself in the study of ethics, because when you come right down to it, the study of ethics is a study of what? Yeah, it's people, us. Why do we do the things that we do? What are those things that motivate us? What are the factors that guide our decision-making processes, both as people and for those of us to whom this applies, for those of us who are public servants as well? What guides those decision-making processes, how we do our job, how we live our lives? That's really what we get to when we talk about this study of ethics. And you know, I have occasionally been asked, in fact, I had a reporter once ask me, you know, Susan, if you could narrow down the need or the benefit of the ethics law to one word or phrase, what would it be? And you know, I know what he was looking for. He was hoping for a word like, oh, it's about corruption, or it's about dirty politics, or it's about under the table deals. You know, the truth is, I've already used the word once of why I believe the ethics law is a good thing, why it's a necessary thing. And it's this one word that I told the reporter, and I said, it's the word bias. To me, that's what the ethics law is really all about addressing. Now, I will admit that I've gotten myself into trouble using that word in my line of work. I was speaking at a major state university once, and a gentleman approached me after my speech was done, and he said to me, you know, Susan, I was a little turned off by a part of your speech. So I thanked him for coming to talk to me, not just leaving angry. I said, well, what is it? What did I do, and how can I fix it? And he told me what he didn't like was that he felt that I had implied in my speech that I suspected that he or some of his colleagues could in fact be biased individuals. Well, that was clumsy of me to leave them with that perception. So let me not make that mistake here tonight in Greenville. I would never come to this fine body of people in this facility and somehow insinuate that I suspect that some of you are biased individuals. I wouldn't do that, and I won't do that. What I will do, though, is stand here and tell you outright that all of you are biased individuals. But guess what? So am I. So is every human being who has ever walked the planet. Now, if you think I'm off base here and you're not quite sure where I'm going with this line of thinking, let me ask a quick question here. Can I get a show of hands of all the moms and dads or even grandparents in the audience? Who here has kids or grandkids in your life? All right. Of all of you who said yes, could you now raise your hand if your children or grandchildren are cuter than your brothers and sisters' children and grandchildren? Smarter? More successful? Yeah. Anybody here the best children or grandchildren in the whole wide world? Just to get it on the table so everybody knows right off the bat. Not that any of you are biased at all, right? Guess what? Bias is part of the human condition, and there's nothing wrong with it. Maybe it's not kids for you. Maybe it's other things that we are biased about as human beings, our families, our friends, our homes, our money, our investments, our jobs, our retirement, those nonprofit activities that mean so much to you, etc. There's nothing wrong with admitting you're biased unless you're afraid to admit that you're human. Nothing wrong with that. So then why then do we need to include this in our discussion in the ethics law? Well, it's that reason right there. Because we humans are biased, that means shock and horror. I'm about to reveal something very scary. That means your government employees and elected officials are in fact biased. Oh no, you know what that means? You all have elected human beings into public office. You have human beings who work in county offices, state offices, city, and guess what? That's okay, because you're not going to find anybody to take those positions who are not biased, because that just means they wouldn't be human. That's not the issue of the ethics law. Let's just get on the table. We're all going to be biased no matter what role we play in life. The issue under the ethics law becomes, what do we do with that bias if in fact that public servant, that elected official, etc., is confronted with that bias as part of their public role in their line of work? That's the issue of the ethics law. What do we do with it? Now, I will tell you, as an example, I spoke actually while we're in this fine facility, American Legion, I spoke right before the holidays in both of Ohio's, two of the Ohio Veterans Homes run by the Ohio Veterans Commission. It's a state agency essentially. There's one in Brown County and one up in Sandusky on Lake Erie. They're essentially hospitals / nursing homes / assisted living facilities for Ohio's veterans. And I'm speaking to their staff for the holidays, and so I want to think of an example that would be relevant to them. So I said to them, I said, okay, let's pretend for 1 minute that I work for the Ohio Veterans Home. And every day at this hypothetical job, I get a stack of files on my desk, and each file represents a veteran from somewhere in the state of Ohio. He or she is seeking some sort of, access to, one of the assisted living apartments that's very coveted. You have a long waiting list, or maybe they need rehab after a surgery, etc. They need a bed in the Alzheimer's unit, etc. And so my job is to go through these stacks of files and make decisions. Approve, deny, need more information, try again next year, not eligible, and on and on. And one day, I'm at this hypothetical job, and I open a file, and I come across a pretty familiar name. Now, I will disclose to you, both in the interest of transparency and so my hypothetical makes some sense, that in my real life, I happen to be the very proud daughter of a World War II veteran. My dad turned 87 years old 2 weeks ago. He served with honor during the war, fought in the jungles of New Guinea, part of the first wave of the invasion of the Philippines. Those of you who know your World War II history know that's a survivor. 2 Purple Hearts, 2 Bronze Stars, and a Silver Star for bravery. You've probably picked up on the fact that I'm just a little biased about my daddy. Yeah, good. Okay, so here I am back on my hypothetical job at the Veterans Home, and I open this file and I said, uh-oh, what do? This is my dad's application. Because now I have 2 halves of my brain in opposition to each other, don't I? One half of my brain is saying, rightfully so, now Susan, you have a legal and a moral obligation to the citizens of this state to make an objective decision based on the established criteria which protects the veterans who apply for these benefits, as well as all the citizens that fund the programs in the first place. Very logical, well thought out argument, don't you think? Now, what's the other half of my brain saying? This is my daddy we're talking about, right? This is not some anonymous, faceless veteran whom I will never meet or know. This is my father, and I'm telling you which half of my brain is going to win that argument, hands down. Does that make me evil? No. Does it make my father ineligible to apply for that assisted living facility? No. But to ensure that the ethics law is in place, to ensure that no public servant's personal decision-making in their job is influenced to the benefit of themselves, their families, for someone with whom they're in a business relationship with, etc. What is, in that hypothetical, my obligation to obey the ethics law? What do I have to do? I step aside. I go take that file right back to the boss and say, hey boss, this needs to be reassigned to somebody who has no idea who it is. I have a conflict, so not only will I step back, I will stay completely out of it. I will not discuss it, I won't mention it, I will stay completely mum. Here's the thing I think that we sometimes overlook. I grant you, there have been some high-profile investigations and prosecutions. We've had a seated governor convicted of ethics crimes. We've had a former attorney general. We've had lots of local governmental people. I understand that those are the things that make headlines. But I think because of those high-profile actually been charged with a crime. They've actually been convicted. They've, stepped down from office, et cetera, et cetera. And we forget that while those things happen, they're legitimate, we forget that the ethics law is in action. It's protecting us in quiet moments, just like those in the city of Greenville, in Darke County, in state offices all around the state, when one decent, hardworking public servant says, hey, you know what? I need to step out of this one. I need to recuse myself from all the discussion, the decisions, the emails, the meetings, because I have a conflict. This impacts my parents' home. This impacts my brother's business. This impacts my sister's application for a grant through that county agency, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to stay away from anything even approaching it. That's what the ethics law has always been about. It's never been about removing our conflicts because they're going to exist. That's just part of being human. It's never been about seeing who we can catch in the act of wrongdoing, although when that happens, there is accountability, part of our investigative processes. But the purpose of the ethics law has always been about for the good public servants out there and for those who do business with public offices. I bet right in this room, you don't have to identify yourself, I'll bet there's somebody in this room at some point in your life has either worked for or owned a company that has sold goods or services to a city office or a county office or a state office. That's normal. Public offices aren't going to make their own pencils. They're going to buy them from somewhere, right? For those folks in the private and the public sectors who want to do the right thing, who want to earn an honest living, but protect the public from unfair, unbalanced, subjective government, those are the folks that the ethics law can be of so much assistance to. They can come to the commission for guidance, for assistance, for advice. We would so much rather, believe you me, help the person who needs advice before they've acted on the conflict than to have to investigate them afterwards. We would much prefer that course of action than having to investigate someone afterwards. So, when we talk about the ethics law, there's a couple areas that we really talk about. One, that first one that we talked a little bit about already, is this issue of conflicts of interest. There's two primary ways that we see conflicts arise in public service. Now, if you're a statute geek, I can tell you where it is, 10203B and E. That's your thing that you like to look up the law, have fun with it. But in a nutshell, what I would tell you is this. When I think of these two provisions of the law, one essentially tells us, if I'm a public servant, I can't use my authority. I can't use my influence to get something of value for myself, for my family, for my business associates. And then the very next part, 03E says, all right, if I'm a public servant, I can't secure or solicit things of value for myself, my family, my business associates. You might be thinking, well, how are those two different? One says that you can't use your authority to get something of value, and the other one says you can't solicit or accept something of value. What's the difference? Here's how I keep these two sections clear in my brain. You won't find this description in the ethics law. This is just way in my fallible little mind that I can keep them clear. When I think of these two somethings of value, I'm not allowed to use my authority to get something of value, and I'm not allowed to accept something of value. Here's how I keep them clear in my mind. I think of the words tangible versus intangible. Now, for any attorneys in the room, don't think about tangible the way tangible is used in courts of law. I'm talking about the way we learned it in the first grade. Can you see it, feel it, hear it, touch it, consume it, imbibe it, enjoy it, and on and on. So here's how I picture these tangible things of value versus intangible things of value. When you have heard about public servants, I don't care if it's in this county, across Ohio, or even across the nation, when you have heard of public servants who have gotten into trouble for taking things that they should not have accepted, what kinds of things come to your mind? Don't give me names of people. How about some examples of things people took that they probably later lived to regret accepting? Holler some out to me. Money. Cash outright. What else? Chickens?
No.
Chickens! That's a better answer. I was like, chickens. Right. Yes, chickens, whether it's to a ball game or a Broadway show, etc. Anything else? Trips. Airfare. Using the company condo. Yeah, exactly. Anything else?
Meals.
Okay. Yeah. How do you remember the CoinGate scandal, the Bureau of Workers' Compensation a few years back, Tom Noe, etc., right? We're not talking about a meal at Big Boy or Bob Evans. We're talking about places like Morton's Steakhouse to the tune of about $120 per person. Okay? Yeah. Those categories are what I'm going to call the tangible things of value. That's 10203E for those of you who like the statute of law. That's what I like to think of as the kind of things of value that you could put in a gift bag and say, here, happy birthday, all right, those kind of things. Then there's this other provision of the statute that's not really gifts, but it's still using my authority, my influence to get something of value. All right, the example that I gave you. Let's say at that hypothetical job at the veterans home, I had signed off on my dad's application to get one of those apartments in the assisted living section of the nursing home, right? It's not a gift, and I didn't benefit, but is me authorizing that securing something of value for a member of my family? Absolutely. So even if it's not a traditional gift you can put in a gift bag, that's still, we're going to call that using our authority to get something of value. I think my favorite example of this using your authority to get something of value, I was speaking in a county, and I have to confess, I don't remember anymore where I was. I do about 200 speeches a year. Sometimes I forget where I was at a given month. So I was speaking in a county somewhere in Ohio, and there was a gentleman that approached me after my speech was done. And he said to me, oh, you know, Susan, I'm so glad you came to speak today because it really cleared some things up for me. I said, great. He tells me that he is the inspector for the county health department. He inspects restaurants as part of his job. And he says, you know that gift thing you were talking about? That's really not an issue for me. I just, even if it's minor, even if it's nominal, I just choose not to accept a free meal or a cup of coffee or a piece of pie from one of these restaurants that I'm inspecting because I just want to keep those lines clear. And I said, that's fine. I said, yeah, you're right. You wouldn't go to jail if you took something minor, but I understand why you're erring on the side of caution. And he said, however, after hearing you speak today, there is something I think I need to be doing differently at my job. And I said, oh, all right, well, tell me more. And he said, well, you know, my parents own 2 restaurants here in the county where I work. And I'll tell you what, after hearing you speak today, I'm thinking maybe I shouldn't be the one inspecting their restaurants anymore. And I said, you think? Great epiphany we got here tonight, right? Yeah, now, granted, this epiphany's come a little late in his career because it would appear to me this has been happening, right? But here's the thing. Somebody tell me, why in this guy, do we have to assume he's just an awful, horrible human being? He's clearly out to bring down democracy as we know it in America today because he inspected his parents' restaurant. Why might he have thought this wasn't that big of a deal, that he inspected his mom and dad's restaurant? Somebody can maybe say, why might he justify it in his mind? Talk louder.
If his parents' restaurant was above board and doing very, very well, and he had no reason to criticize him,
what if he
never come up.
What if he did an exactly accurate, fair inspection? I reflected when maybe I was even a little tougher on them because they're my mom and dad, right? Do we believe him? Maybe. I mean, maybe he did that inspection absolutely accurately. But the ethics law is what we like to call a uniform standard of conduct, meaning it's the same for everybody. None of us at the Ethics Commission walk into a room and go, all right, you I trust. You not so much. So why don't you obey the ethics law, you go ahead and inspect your parents' restaurant. It's not like that. The guessing game should be removed for all of us. The next time you walk into a restaurant, the next time you drop off a loved one, your grandchild, at a school building, put them on the school bus. The next time, you enter any sort of public building that was inspected by a building department, you have the right to expect that there was no question mark of how that person made that decision, how they did the inspection. You have the right to assume that person had absolutely no stake in that, in that situation. They had no horse in that race at all, so to speak. That's the idea of the ethics law. It's to make sure that objectivity is what rules when we're talking about governmental work, governmental decisions, etc. So that's kind of what I like to call those intangible things of value, that like the inspections, the investigations, reviews, recommendations, etc. When we are talking about the more tangible things of value, I get a lot of questions in my line of work about gifts. If I'm a public servant, am I allowed to accept anything? Am I allowed to accept everything, nothing? Is there somewhere in between? If I'm in the private sector and I'm selling, widgets to, the Darke County Department of, widget sales, am I allowed to drop off the normal cookie tray that I would give to any other client? We get a lot of questions about gifts. So here's what I would tell you right off the bat, 2 things. First of all, everything has value. If it has any monetary value to the ethics law, it's got to have value. This bottle of water has value under the ethics law. But the second thing I would tell you is this. There is no dollar amount that's a cutoff in the state of Ohio for gifts. It does not exist. People will sometimes ask me, well, what is it, Susan? 10 bucks, 20, 30, 40, 50? What is it? Just tell me, and I promise I'll obey it. We do not have a dollar amount that's a cutoff for the acceptance of gifts. For those of you who are financial disclosure filers, you know that you have a cutoff amount of what you have to report, assuming you are allowed to accept the gift. If it's from your best friend who lives in Texas today, yeah, you can accept it, but you're going to disclose it over a certain amount. For acceptance, there is no such dollar amount. So how do we know that? Well, here's what the statute essentially tells us. I'm paraphrasing quite a bit here. I'm not quoting word for word from the statute, but the statute essentially says, okay, if you're a public servant, you are not allowed to secure, solicit, or accept anything that has the characteristic to manifest a substantial and improper influence on you. And if you are in the private sector and you're doing business with a government office, or you're regulated by that office, or you've got an interest in the work they're doing, you're not going to promise, offer, or give anything to that public servant that has the characteristic to manifest a substantial and an improper influence. And I know you're thinking, well, that clears it right up there, Susan. Thank you so much. We'll be on the lookout for substantial and improper gifts all around us, right? Okay. All that means is, right, here's that two-part equation, substantial and improper. Let's tackle improper first because it's the easier one. An improper source. I'm a public servant, right? I'm a state employee. So an improper source to me as a public servant is anyone who's doing or seeking to do business with my office, right? The people who fix our copiers, the people who sell us IT equipment, the people who, I don't know, shampoo our carpets. They're in some sort of business or want to be in a business relationship with that public entity. It happens all the time. It's perfectly normal if you've got public relationships with businesses. But that means those folks are not going to give me substantial gifts because they are an improper source. Another improper source is anyone that we regulate under the ethics law. For some of you, it may be a different public body, ODJFS, another kind of, health department, etc. Anyone who's regulated by that entity is going to be an improper source of substantial gifts. And those with an interest, a vested or a specific interest in things going on before that office. In my office, how about the people that we're investigating? Do they have a vested interest in how that investigation turns out? Yeah. So that means I'm not going to accept substantial things of value. So improper is anyone doing or seeking to do business with a public office, regulated by or have an interest in the matters pending at that public office. That's an improper source. Doesn't make them bad people. All it means is they would be improper sources of substantial gifts or things of value to me as a public servant. So if we don't have a dollar amount, how do we define substantial? All right, here's what the ethics law said in its written interpretation of the Ohio Ethics Law. You ready for this? This will clear it right up. They said, this thing of value, whatever it is that we are talking about, it is not substantial if it's nominal. You go to law school for 3 years to learn to write things like that. It's amazing, isn't it? No, okay, what they said nominal, they even used the Latin phrase de minimis. Now, with all due respect to any of you who've ever studied or taught Latin, here's how I like to very loosely translate the Latin phrase de minimis back into English. You ready? We don't care. These are the things that the Ethics Commission would essentially say. If you don't want to accept them, fine, don't accept them. But if a public servant chooses to accept them, it's not substantial, it's not illegal, it's not prohibited under the statute. Here were some examples that the Ethics Commission gave of nominal things of value. De minimis, not substantial, not illegal. Frankly, we're not going to take up a case on it, okay? Here are some of their examples. Like promotional items. You know, if you go to a statewide conference for people who are in your line of work, you know how the vendors have their booths set up in the hallways? What's some of the gadgets and swag they're handing out that has their logo on it? There you go. All that kind of stuff. Nominal, de minimis. If a public servant declines them, if you are in the private sector and you offer them, the coffee mug with your company logo on it and they decline it, I would ask you to respect that because that's their comfort level. But that's not what we're opening and investigating. No one's gone to prison lately for accepting a coffee mug. Trust me. This is not what we're talking about. In fact, I have a coffee mug story. I was speaking at a conference at the Columbus Convention Center. And I was going to walk back to my office after the speech was done. And a guy stops me in the hallway and he says, Susan, before you go back to your office, I thought you might want to know what I just witnessed in the vendor ballroom. I was like, what? I'm like, this big crime. And he says, one of my colleagues from my office, I watched him, Susan. He walked up to this one vendor booth and he picked up not one, but 2 coffee mugs. And then it gets better. Then he walked over to this other vendor booth, because they had these great big bins of Hershey Kisses, and he used both those coffee mugs. And then he looked at me like this. Like, what exactly did he think I was gonna do, right? SWAT team, backdoor, chocolate violation, East Wing. Okay, this is pretty nominal under the eyes of the ethics law. This is not the kind of thing we're investigating. The commission even said minor food items. Again, if you choose to decline this as a public servant, or if you're in the private sector and that person or office declines it, respect that. But in general, these minor food items, like, I don't know, in my line of work, I don't have a lot of great examples from my line of work. People send remarkably few presents to the Ohio Ethics Commission. So I'm hearing from other people that some public offices get things, let's say the holidays, like a tin of popcorn, the 1-pound box of the Anthony Thomas chocolates, etc. Again, now I would ask people to be aware of what's called the aggregate value. It is true, if one time a vendor to my office picked up my tab for a bagel and a cup of tea at a local donut shop, one time, no, not an issue of the ethics law. Let's say they do it twice a week for the entire year. Now that is adding up to what we would call a substantial thing of value, but in general, those one-time, occasional minor things, this is not what we're prosecuting, or referring, I should say, for prosecution under the Ohio ethics law. The gifts that have landed people in legal hot water are some of the things that you all mentioned earlier. We've had cases of people taking airfare. We've had cases of people, renting an oceanfront home in the Florida Keys for 1 week during spring break for $300. Yeah, you know what the going rate for those houses really are? Anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000. Yeah. So we've had cases like that. The $120 meals I mentioned at Morton Steakhouse, theater tickets, tickets to games. In spite of the scandal of this past year, I have to tell you, OSU football tickets are still widely sought in Columbus, Ohio. These are things of substantial value. Now, can a public servant ever take the ticket to the Broadway show from their vendor? Can they ever accept that ticket to that Broadway show under any circumstance? Sure, if they what? Yeah, if you actually pay for it, okay. Now again, could that person still choose not to avoid the appearance? Here's the thing I would tell you. Now I don't know, I heard that you guys did have quite a large standing room only meeting about Senate Bill 5 issue 2 some time ago. And whatever side of that argument you're on, I respect, that's totally up to you. But I think something everybody can agree on is that public service is under an unprecedented level of scrutiny, at least in my years of public service. Is that fair to say? And I'm not saying it's good or bad, it just is. I think it's being, in the spotlight a little more than, as I said, since I've been a public servant. I'll tell you, I've been, I hit my 20-year anniversary with the state of Ohio this past year. I was 9 years old when I started with the state. You all knew that, right? Yeah. Okay. But I'll tell you, in my 2 decades of public service, I think people are really paying attention. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. But as a result, though, I think maybe one of the positives to come out of that is that people aren't just obeying the letter of the law, that some people really are beginning to give a lot of thought to the spirit of the law, those appearances of impropriety. I tell you the truth. All right, for example, somebody in this room kindly provided me with a bottle of water. Pretty nominal under the ethics law, right? Not an issue. Well, I will tell you a story, though, of something that I declined, even though I'm not completely sure it would have been an issue under the ethics law. I was speaking, I will not tell you where I was. I was speaking in a county that, every year when maybe like ODJFS comes out with a list of which counties are most affluent to the least affluent. And all I will say is this was a county that's pretty consistently in the lowest 5 to 10 in terms of people who really need, aid to families of dependent children and welfare help and assistance with medical issues, et cetera, a lot of unemployment and so forth. So I'm speaking in that county. It was a gathering of all the township trustees. They have this about once a year, like, workshop and professional development, and speakers come in. And they asked me to be the keynote speaker during their dinner hour. So of course I'm sitting up front here, with people, and normally if there's some little tiny modest meal, and I'm one speaker of many, or just eating a little modest meal, sure, I'll partake of the, little sandwich or bag of potato chips and so forth. Well, this one night I'm sitting up front, and I'm expecting the typical kind of meal. the half a sandwich with the apple and the bag of chips and a cookie kind of catered meal, right? And so what I'm seeing, I'm eating this little salad and they had this little roll and I had this glass of iced tea and I'm sitting up front waiting for the speech to begin. And I watch the wait staff emerging from the kitchen. And on their trays, on each plate, they have, I kid you not, first of all, there was a piece of salmon, if you like salmon, beautifully prepared, piece of dill on top, etc. And next to it, I am not using hyperbole when I say a prime rib steak, I'll bet you it was this big around and this thick. Oh, and if you like your prime rib rare, oh, would you have been happy? I think I detected a heartbeat in some of these steaks on the plates. And I'm having this internal battle of, you know, if it's a modest meal, I know it's not substantially as it is, it's a little more expensive, but maybe it's not substantial because maybe they got a good deal, maybe it was a farmer that donated, maybe per person, maybe not that expensive, maybe it's not, but I don't know, maybe it's other. And I'm just like having this debate in my mind of what to do. And for me, do you know what the final decision-making factor consisted of? If I had eaten that meal, would it have actually been a statutory violation? I don't know about that, but all I could think about was the fact that somewhere in some weekly newspaper, some township resident had recently read an article that said there's not enough money to fill the potholes again. And that next week's article may very well read, your township trustees enjoyed a prime rib and salmon meal on your dime. For me, that was enough to say, no thanks, I'll be okay with just this salad, right? So I would say, if nothing else, I think some of the controversy that has arisen the past year has maybe helped people be more aware of even that appearance of impropriety. The idea of the ethics law is to ensure all of us, whether you're in the private or public sector, whether you're retired, all of us who call Ohio home have the right to expect that government is not compromised based on any one public servant's desires, benefits, needs, or wants, okay? So that's kind of that overview of conflict. I do want to talk about one other area of the law, and then I want to hear whatever's on your mind. The other area of the law is one that I really would ask everybody in Ohio to be aware of because it's just insidious how the damage it can cause, and that's the issue of nepotism. And I realize that there are many parts of Ohio, including the one that I grew up in, where there's been a cultural thing, right? You know, it's not a big deal if I hire my kid, you know, and of course, you know, back in the day, do you remember when, back in the day when the sheriff's wife, and I say, because back then there were no female sheriffs, that the sheriff's wife, as soon as he was elected, got a job. Does anybody remember what that job was called back in the 50s and the 60s? Jail matron. Jail matron, right? No woman worth her salt would ever be called matron again, willingly. But back then, jail matron, right? That was cultural, that was automatic, and then she reported to the sheriff. Nepotism is not okay under the ethics law, to put it mildly, okay? That it's just because it's been that way, just because, hey, it's not that big of a deal, just because we didn't get that many applicants. Here's where this becomes an issue. If you really, again, if you're a statute geek, 292142A1, okay? It is one of only two felony provisions in the Ohio ethics law. The majority of the ethics law are in fact misdemeanors in the first degree, like the conflicts of interest that I just talked about. Hiring our family members into public offices is a felony of the fourth degree. Now, I don't know about you, but that's not one of the things that I want to try before I die. I wonder what it's like to be a convicted felon. I'm just going to leave that right off the bucket list if I can help it, right? You know, here's the thing, too. It is my observation. I have no data to back this up at all, right? But it is my observation that the general public is quicker to forgive cases of public embezzlement before cases of nepotism. And here's my theory. I don't have any data, there's no sense, it's just my theory. I suspect it's because the public will see someone who embezzles public money as a bad seed, right? It's unfortunate, they flew under the radar, they slipped through the cracks. Thank heavens we finally caught them. Let's see how much money we can recoup. Let's sentence this person to prison, put better controls in place, and move on. Where the public tends to see nepotism as a cultural issue. It's a habit. It's something we do here. It's one of the perks of being a public employee or public official, right? This can be very damaging, not to that one person's reputation, but to the reputation of that entire city, county, state office, etc. So what is nepotism? Essentially, it is using your public job to influence the hiring process in favor of your family members. Okay, now that's not, again, I'm paraphrasing here from the statute. If in fact a member, if I'm a public servant, which I am, let's say a member of my family would like a public job, are they prohibited from seeking a public job just because I'm a public official, public employee? No, they can apply for any public job they want to, but what must I do as the current public employee or official? I'm out of this. Hey, son, good luck, but you're on your own. I'm not making phone calls for you. I'm not filling out your application. I'm not hand-delivering your resume. I'm not reviewing the other applicants. I'm not making recommendations. I'm not talking down to applicants. I'm not sitting in the interviews. And I'm certainly not going to be the hiring authority. This is a felony, okay? So, in fairness, what's our definition of family? Are we saying if my fourth cousin twice removed applies for a public job, I can't review their resume? No, we have a fairly specific definition. And here it is. Here's the definition. Family, for purpose of nepotism in the ethics law, is your spouse, your siblings, your parents, your grandparents, and your step-parents, right? So that's the generations above us. Parents, step-parents, grandparents. Now let's go generation beneath us. Children, stepchildren, and grandchildren, right? And then you've got spouse and your siblings here, right? These folks that I just named, spouse, sibling, parents, step-parents, grandparents, children, stepchildren, grandchildren, are always your family. Doesn't matter when's the last time you see them. Doesn't matter if they're not financially dependent on you. Doesn't matter if you've never lived with them. Your whole life, you've never lived with your stepmother. They are your family for purposes of nepotism. If any of these folks apply for a public job, you simply stay out. Not just out of the, if you're an elected official, not just step out of the voting, but the discussion, the deliberating, recommending, reviewing, lobbying, behind-the-scenes discussions, etc. You stay completely out of it altogether. If, in fact, we're talking about a member of your family, it's a little more extended. Your in-laws, your cousins, your, nieces, nephews, etc. Those extended family members are only going to be considered family for purposes of nepotism if, in fact, that extended family member resides in your home. All right, that's only for extended. For immediate family, doesn't matter where they live. So, example, it would always be illegal. If you're a public servant, it would always be illegal for you to hire your brother. Always, always, always illegal, no exceptions, it's a felony. If it's your brother-in-law, however, it's only illegal if what? If he lives with you, which I grant you gives you lots of motivation to find him a job and get him out of your basement. I'm with you on that, but the process still must happen objectively. Now, let's say that you are a city manager and a member of your family does in fact apply for a job. You stay out of it. They're hired without your input. You have nothing to do with it. They actually get the job. What's one more thing you need to be aware of? What's that?
Perception.
Okay, the perception. Yeah, I think that's very fair. But in terms of legality and the ethics laws, is there anything else that person needs to be aware of? Exactly. Someone else is their supervisor. I am not supervising my own spouse, my own sister, my own child, etc. I'm not doing their performance evaluations or assigning them work or doing disciplinary action or promotions. I'm removed from that as well. All right. I realize that again, having grown up in a small community, I understand that bigger cities, in a lot of ways, it's easier for them to avoid some of these issues, isn't it? I mean, let's be honest. If the county engineer in Hamilton County, advertises for a job on the engineer's office, they're going to get 200 resumes, right? It's fairly easy to avoid those comps. You say, my goodness, there's a lot of people we could hire. I grant you, in a township in Darke County, if you need somebody to mow the cemetery in the summertime, in Greenville, you need teenagers who are licensed lifeguards to work at the city pool. I realize it can seem easy, convenient, well, yeah, my kid's a licensed lifeguard. Or in the township, well, my kid has, landscaping equipment. Sure, yeah, it's fine. I realize that might seem tempting because it's easy, they'll do a good job, etc. But you have to remember that the public has the right to expect. I, as the public, we have the right to expect that there's objectivity in those decisions. If a member of your family, in fact, wants to apply for one of those jobs, wonderful, wish them well. but we stay out of it. There was a city once that we worked with a local prosecutor in an investigation, because what they would do is, it wasn't a city as big as Cincinnati, but it was maybe the size of like a, I don't know, like a 50,000 person kind of town. So it wasn't, you know, a gigantic metropolis, but it was still a good sized place. They had a pattern that before they posted the jobs for the lifeguards at the city pool, they handed around a clipboard. And if you as an employee of that city had a child or a loved one who's a licensed lifeguard, you wrote their name down. So if they had 15 jobs available and they had 10 city employees with loved ones who were lifeguards, they only posted for 5 jobs. Anybody here comfortable with that process? And as you have the right not to be. If, I would say to you, if nepotism is an issue at all, in any of the offices or the agencies you are affiliated with, you do not have to come confess to me tonight. If you do, that can be fun, but you don't have to. But I would ask you to take steps to fix it, okay? We do not have family members reporting to us. We do not hire our own family members. It's a violation of the public's trust. It's not worth the damage in the end to anybody. I've always said nepotism is a lose-lose-lose situation. Now, you don't get 3 lose situations very often, right? The first loss, let's say that I hire my spouse to come work for me at the ethics. Now, that would actually be a 4th loss there, I think. I don't think that would be a good idea if he came to work for me. We've got a good thing going. I don't want to mess it up my mortgage for him. But nonetheless, let's say I hire him to come work for me. I'm convicted of a 4th-degree felony. Chances are I'm not going to be working for the Ohio Ethics Commission very long if I'm convicted of a 4th-degree felony of the ethics law. So I've probably lost my job and been convicted of a felony. Guess what happens to my loved one's job if I'm convicted of that felony? Bye! Clean out your desk. Even if you're the best employee you ever had, it was an illegal contract. It was an illegal hire. So now I've lost my, my reputation because I'm a convicted felon now, right? He's lost his job anyway, and I would say to you that 3rd loss really is the loss of public trust. This is one that the public notices, they pay attention to, and they feel betrayed when they know public servants are using their public job or public office to benefit their family members. This is one to avoid. If it's an issue now, it's one to fix. Okay? All right, so that's my ethics law in a nutshell. This lady should consider decaf coffee. I know I'm like this, but it's an area that I'm passionate about. So are there thoughts, questions, concerns on your mind that I can help with? Yes?
I know for OJFS we have a place online now that people can go and report unemployment fraud. Can people go to your website and do the same thing?
We do not accept allegations of investigation by email, by election. And the reason is we accept them by phone call. You can remain anonymous if you choose to. You can come meet with us. The only reason that we do not accept, that we don't communicate about investigations or allegations of wrongdoing via electronic means, is because by statute, that information is confidential. We've never had our computers hacked into, but just to be on the safe side, we don't do electronic discussion. So if someone emails us something like that, what we will do is email them back and say, would you mind calling us and we'll discuss with you. So you can call us with allegations if you want to. What else? Anything else? Now, I'm really very not scary, really. I've got one in writing so far. Okay. Would something of value include using your position to help a friend, family member, or associate secure a public position? Well, that's a good question. If, in fact, I'm a public servant or public official, and I'm using my position to help someone get a public position, we're going to look first at the felony provision. If you actually hired someone, we're going to look at the felony position. If, in fact, I use my position to help a family member, I didn't hire them, but maybe I helped them get that position. I made some phone calls on their behalf, and I didn't actually hire them. We could be looking at a conflict of interest at using my position to secure a thing of value. We have occasionally had felony nepotism cases pled down to conflict of interest misdemeanors. That can happen. So what I would say to you is, if someone, in fact, is using their public position to secure anything of value, they should call us first. You know, here's what you should know about the Ohio Ethics Commission. We have 3 attorneys at our office that their entire job is to offer guidance under the Ohio Ethics law based on our interpretation law, based on past precedent. People can call us, people can write us letters, people can come to us and get free guidance from our attorneys. We are not a private law firm. You're not going to get an invoice in the mail from us. And again, that's part of our budget to help good people who want to do the right thing, do the right thing. We do have an investigation staff, but we would much rather invest our time and money in advice and helping people do the right thing. We have another one here. How about city council people voting on new salary schedules for employees when, okay, so I'm on the city council and my spouse works for the city. Can I vote on the budget or pay increases? That's a great question. The commission has talked before about what we call an across-the-board impact. If I'm on city council and I'm voting on pay increases or health care benefits for all city staff, and it's going to be an across-the-board impact, yes, I can participate in the discussion and the vote, even if my spouse works for the city, if in fact it's an across-the-board impact. We don't want it to become that the ethics law makes government not able to function. We don't want it to be a, well, this city budget talks about improving city roads, and I drive on city roads. I guess I can't vote. We don't want that to be the case. If it's an across-the-board impact, yes, that person can participate. Now let's say, though, that my spouse is looking to be promoted. All right? There's some special thing going on. They're going to create a new position. My spouse is seeking that position. Now, I'm going to stay out of that. But if it's an across-the-board impact, yes, that person can participate. Can relatives of school board be hired? Yes, if in fact that school board member is in fact able to recuse themselves from everything, not just the vote, the participation, the discussion, etc. One thing I will say though is there is a provision statute, which I don't pretend to be an expert on. It's not the ethics law. It's a law that regulates school districts in general, and I wouldn't begin to know what the statute number is. But superintendents cannot have family members hired while he or she is superintendent. Even if he or she is able to stay out of all the discussion, a superintendent cannot have a family member hired while he or she is in fact a superintendent. Okay? All right. Should a teacher's parent, child, or spouse be able to run for Board of Education? Is that reverse nepotism? Well, there's nothing in the ethics law that prohibits someone from running for a public position. If in fact a person gets elected, there will be provisions of the ethics law that's going to limit some of what they can or can't do perhaps, but it does not prohibit someone from running from a public office. I would say though, especially because we're in a season here of the primaries right upon us here, I always encourage people who are running for public office, or even if they're incumbents, and I think most people are going to do this anyway, to be aware of both the ethics law and Ohio's elections laws as well. In the state of Ohio, the elections law and elections commission is a separate body from the ethics commission. So I just encourage everybody to just be aware of both of those if in fact they're looking for an elected position. Okay? That's all I have. What else you got? Oh, you guys are way too nice to, come on, somebody ask me a question. I drove a long way, you guys gotta keep me at least till 7. Okay, yes?
Okay, if you call for guidance, can you do that anonymously also?
Well, you certainly can. You know, here's what I would tell you. The advice is only as good as the facts you give us. So, while some of it's easy. Some of it's, if you call me and say, you call one of our attorneys, I'm actually not an attorney, but if you call one of our attorneys, let's say, and you say, hey, I'm on the booster club for the high school, and we're wondering if we can do some fundraisers to augment the high school football coach's salary so he doesn't ever leave. We want to really keep him. Well, that's easy. I can tell you that right now. We've got advisory committee that says, no, you can't do that. You can't hand a coach more money from the booster club saying, here, don't leave, right? That's an easy one. So in that case, sure, you could call, and that's going to be a 2-second conversation. Here, let me email you, or even, if you want to come pick it up, so you want to stay anonymous, sure, we'll give you the opinion and everything. If in fact, though, you're calling about something that's a little more complicated, the advice we give you is only as good as what we can talk about with you on the phone. So if you're anonymous, you won't give us any details, we're going to do the best we can, but you are not given the cloak of protection that, let's say, a written advisory opinion would. Let's say somebody from the city of Greenville writes the Ethics Commission a letter and says, we're worried we've got this conflict of interest here with, grant funding, and somebody's on the city council, it's also on the Parks and Board, we want to make sure we do the right thing. If, assuming the facts are all accurate in that letter that that person sent to us, the attorneys are going to draft a response based on the statute and past precedent. We're going to forward that to our commission members who are going to vote yes or no. We think this is the right advice to give them. If they say, yep, this is the advice we got to give them, we're going to send you that letter. Assuming the facts were accurate, and assuming that person follows the advice in that letter, that person has legal immunity. They cannot be charged with a crime on that issue, they cannot be sued in a civil court of law, and they cannot be removed from their public job or office. Now, can someone challenge the opinion legally? Sure, but who are they challenging? It's us. You, as the person who received the opinion, if you follow the advice, you have legal immunity. So if we just have an anonymous phone call with you, we're going to give you general guidance, but you don't have that cloak of immunity that you would if you actually tell us the actual issues and the specifics, and we can actually respond to it in writing. Yeah, it's a great question, though. What else? Yes, in the back.
What about lobbying? Where does that fall? The lobbyist trying to sway the person that wants to be elected.
Right. Well, there are lobbying laws, and there is an ethics commission that's sort of dedicated to legislative issues. Just so you know, there are 3 ethics commissions in the state of Ohio, just because there's 3 branches of government, right? There's one for judges. They regulate, I don't know, several thousand maybe. Then there's one for the legislature and lobbyists, so they regulate maybe 1,000 or 2,000. And then we regulate the rest of the 590,000 public servants in the state of Ohio. So we kind of have the lion's share of work, but that's okay. Lobbyists actually fall into the Joint Legislative Ethics Committee, which is also based in Columbus. So there are definitely laws limiting gifts and that kind of thing. What I would tell you is, though, if I try to talk too much about that, I'm going to get myself in trouble because I'm not an expert on the lobbying laws. But they do exist. There are limits on what elected officers like your state reps, your state senators can accept from lobbyists, etc. And again, this would be another area that I would say, in addition to the ethics laws, they also want to be aware of the elections laws. They're not violating campaign donation laws and that sort of thing that we have seen before in the history of Ohio. Yeah.
What about all the discussion that has occurred recently with some federal money about inside trading, and the public officials may do inside trading, but yet the ordinary citizen would be arrested for such a thing?
Yeah. Well, again, this will sound like a cop-out. I don't mean it to, but I know just enough about federal law to be dangerous. My expertise is obviously state law within the state of Ohio. There is a federal ethics commission. It's called the Office of Governmental Ethics. That is based in D.C. and does regulate federal employees as well as members of Congress and the United States Senate as well. You know, what I would tell you, I guess what I would tell you is there's no system that's going to be perfect. I would argue that the ethics laws in Ohio are fairly well developed. Considering they've only been around since 1974, I think they're stricter than many states. You know, we have an annual conference that we attend for people who do what we do for a living, because I don't really have a lot of peers in Ohio. You know, somebody who does full-time ethics education, I'm kind of it in the States. I don't have a lot of peers, so we go to this conference to exchange ideas, etc. And there is a certain state that shall remain nameless that loves to needle me about, you guys had this many convictions last year, we only had this many, which state's more ethical? And I always respond back, you know, I guess technically, when you were, you know, or maybe you currently are, when you have raised children, if you had absolutely no rules in your house, technically you could say, my kid never breaks any rules, right? Really, you guys didn't have a rule against setting the mattresses on fire? You didn't frown on that at all in your house? Okay, I guess you're right. But if you actually have such rules or laws in place, they can be broken, therefore your numbers might look higher, you know, kind of thing. But the truth is, even though I know there's always short-term pain when someone's convicted, it's true, isn't it? Even if they deserved it, there's always that moment of, oh, man, our community looks bad, public servants look bad right now, but I still would say there's long-term gain there. I'm glad there's accountability. Anybody here, I'm curious, anybody here, just out of curiosity, following the corruption scandal in Cuyahoga County? Some of you are following that, yeah. If you're not, and you got a couple free hours on your hands tonight, go home and Google Cuyahoga County corruption. The FBI has called that investigation the largest investigation into a county government in the history of the FBI. How would you like that to be your claim to fame? Woo! Biggest investigation in FBI history, right here, Cuyahoga County, right? You know, I think we're up to 52 people convicted so far. Currently, right now, as we speak, the last 4 to 6 weeks, and still occurring, is the trial, even though it was for Cuyahoga County where Cleveland is based, it's taking place in Akron. They moved the venue, right, for a former commissioner. And if I tried to list all the things he's alleged to have done, we would be here till next Tuesday, right? Just for fun, just go home and Google Cuyahoga County. But here's what I would say to you. Here's the unfortunate part of that. You have about 9,000 people who work for that county. And I would argue about 8,900 of them are really good people who work very hard. You know, I'm biased, here's my word again. You know, my dad, who I mentioned, is 87, was born in 1925 to Russian immigrants in a teeny little neighborhood right outside of downtown Cleveland, right? So I have a great love for this city that was a haven to immigrants looking for a better way of life. Is that what people are talking about when they think of Cuyahoga County right now? They help, you know, World War II, I would argue, would not have been won without contributions of places like Cleveland that had steel mills, etc. Is that what people are talking about? No, they're talking about how crooked they all are. The mistake by the lake, you know, they're all in it for themselves. And that's what I mean, though, by short-term pain when things like this happen. But again, for long-term gain, because again, as taxpayers, you and I have the right to expect that government's not a fishing well for public servants to go get their goodies. That's not what it's for. For those of us who have chosen public service, for part of all of our career, we have to accept the fact there are some perks that do not belong to us. You know, my husband works for Chase Bank. And I grant you, not so much the last few years, the economy having kind of gone sour here, but back before, when it was Bank One in Ohio, I'm telling you what, the whining and the dining and the golf clubs and the country clubs and the, honey, I gotta be at this dinner and I've got to go take a client golf. He always phrased it that way. It was never, honey, I'm really sorry. You know, I know it's gonna be more fun what I'm doing. You're gonna be home, you know, helping out with, you know, dinner and so forth. But, you know, it was always, I have to take this client golfing. Oh, really? Right? For those of us in public service, we accept that's not our reality. And people like my husband in the corporate world, he's the first one to say to you, I could never work for the government. And you know what I always say? That's okay. It's okay that not everybody's cut from that cloth. But for someone like that, I'm glad he recognizes that running for a public office is probably not a good fit for him. I'm glad, right? For those of us who are wanting to take on that role of public service, we better be willing to accept the prohibitions along with some of the responsibilities and the good parts, because there are good parts. This is a 20-year state employee talking, and I'm not talking about good parts about benefits and all the other things you hear about. I'm talking about the fact that I feel really good about the fact that I would like to believe that someday when I'm gone, that somebody will say, all right, Susan Willeke, all right, yeah, she showed up for work. She took as much as she could, and yeah, she did what she had to. She gave the minimum. Versus someone looking back on my life and my career saying, no, she tackled her career with joy, with passion, with integrity, and maybe, just maybe in the little corner of the bottom of my heart, that someday someone will be able to say, maybe she even made a little bit of a difference in her world because of the work she did. That matters to me. For others of you in public service, I hope it matters to you too. And I hope that you will see the Ethics Commission not as a long arm of the law out to get you, not as something scary that you should be afraid of, but as a free resource to help you do what you do well, with ethical principles at the heart of it all. Take advantage of that. Take advantage of the legal guidance, and even, frankly, the investigations. If you really think there's something nefarious that needs to be addressed, let us help you do that. It's not uncommon for prosecutors to call us to say, hey, this is your area of expertise, and frankly, I don't have the manpower to do this investigation. Can you help me out? Yes, because we still believe that in spite of those few bad apples that can ruin a barrel, I still believe that public servants, for the most part, are people of integrity and honor who do make a difference in their community. Those are the folks that we really want to help, you know, do the right thing when they're in a dilemma that they're just not sure what to do. Any final closing thoughts or words of wisdom from you all? You've heard me ramble for an hour. What words of wisdom do you all have as we close out a good night together? Well, I hope this was helpful. I hope that it was not as scary as you thought it was. Okay, and just for my little ego, when you leave here, tell all the people who didn't come, this one was way more fun than the Senate.